Hello and welcome to Unstuff America, the podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Mellen, and I am so excited about our guest today. Our guest is Gillian Caldwell. She is a longtime friend, and she is a powerhouse in the world. So we're in for a great treat today. We're going to learn both on the macro and the micro level what allows Gillian to accomplish so much in her personal life and her professional life to affect change around the globe. And without further ado, Gillian, please just share a little bit about yourself, about your work, what your home life is like, if you live with other people or if you live alone, those kinds of things, so that we can just get a sense for the context of your domestic life.
Well, so I'm originally from New York, although I live in London now and have been living here for the last 2 years with my family. I have 13 and 15-year-old children, an elder daughter and a younger son, and my partner, Lewis. We moved here for my new job, which is not so new anymore, as the CEO of Global Witness. And we focus on investigations and campaigns around natural resource extraction and related corruption, environmental and human rights abuse. So that's a little about me.
Excellent. And you folks alive?
Yep, both of my parents are alive and well. My mother has had her second hip surgery, and that, of course, has put some strain on my brothers and I because there's been various complications and none of us live nearby. But in terms of navigating that challenge between midlife and children and parents, I would consider myself fairly lucky thus far.
Excellent. And I know that it is a concern or a challenge for some of our listeners that being in that sandwich generation, raising your own children and also having aging parents who are anywhere on that spectrum from totally awesome to having some complications as a result of aging and needing support. So it's another real demand. There are plenty of narrative demands, stories that we tell ourselves about how we're using our time that are fictional, but there are very real demands that need to be considered when we're trying to do the math of how we're spending our time. So that's great. I'm so glad that your folks are in, all things considered, are in good shape. Tell me on a macro and micro level, what really inspires you and what makes you upset, what pisses you off? So we can get a sense of that too, both, small, big picture upsets and inspirations.
So big picture excitement is really, the power and possibility that people have to make a difference in the world, and notwithstanding, a lot of scary news every day, which seems, of course, to be the news media's obsession, the scary news rather than the good news.
I know. What's that about?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of bad news, and I'm not saying we shouldn't cover it, but
no,
I think it would be good to be learning about solutions and people working together to make a difference. So I'm inspired by that, by social justice work, broadly defined. At a macro level, I think we're in a dangerous trend globally, which is one in which I think people are increasingly frustrated by and cynical about governance and politicians, and they feel that the system is rigged, as it so often is, against everyday people and in favor of vested interests, whether it's companies or wealthy individuals. And unfortunately, at times, especially if they're feeling economically insecure, that can lead them to make fairly rash choices, as I believe they did in the case of electing Donald Trump, and in the case of Brexit here in the UK, which was the decision to leave the European Union. So, at a macro level, those are the excitements and the concerns. At a micro level, I get excited by just beautiful landscapes and those everyday moments, where you see humanity and beauty shining through. And I get frustrated by people who aren't honest enough with themselves and other people around them, and who don't seem conscious of what it means to be in human community.
Yeah, it is a challenge. I think that certainly with the work that I do, getting people to shift their mindset and actually get clear with themselves without judgment around the choices that they're making is the key, or a key, not maybe the key, but certainly a key to shifting the physical clutter and challenges that you're facing so that you can do some deeper interior work, right? I mean, the surface stuff, it's going to just sit there if you're not clear about what really matters to you. If you can't tell the truth to yourself about that without judging yourself, it's going to be that much harder to affect any change on a macro or a micro level. So on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the least organized and 10 being the most organized, where would you put yourself on that scale?
I'm a 9.5.
Awesome.
So I am, as anybody can tell you, one of the most organized people you'll ever meet. However, there is one context in which I am not organized, and it's actually it's almost like an Achilles heel.
Huh.
And interestingly enough, it's packing. It's packing a bag.
Wow.
I seem to have a real block around packing a bag, and unless I really get conscientious about it and make a list before I even pack, I invariably find myself with too much or too little or something obvious missing. Or I might often, as a mother with a busy family and a busy job, be thinking about myself last when it comes to packing, making sure my kids have got everything they need, and I walk out the door, without shoes on, kind of thing. So that's and I think that dates back to the divorce and, the fact that every Sunday I had to pack up, leave my dad's house and travel to my mother's house. I think there's some deep-rooted psychological stuff around packing. Beyond that, I'm pretty well situated in the organizational skills front.
Excellent. So when we think about the last thing that you purchased besides food or other consumables, what was that? Do you remember what the last thing is that you purchased?
Yeah, so I had to think about it because I saw that question in advance, and it took me a while because I'm not a big consumer, but I do recall on my birthday on July 20th, which was a mere 18 days ago, that I spent a little time ambling around, and the last thing I bought was on that day, which was a nice black dress, which is quite handy for my day-to-day working life.
Excellent. So no regrets about that purchase.
No regrets, but I'm a very, I did a year, no new stuff, not so long ago, inspired in part by a conversation with so-called no impact man, Colin Beavan. And I didn't make a full year, actually. I did it January 1 through October 31st. And other than consumables or something imperative like a filter for the water, I didn't buy anything for 10 months. And that was an interesting exercise, I think, because not because I buy a lot of unnecessary items or because I'm a major consumer, but because there are moments in a given, say, 6-week period in which I might feel like I want to buy something. That's just what I feel like. I want to buy something, and it could be a keychain or a car. It doesn't really matter. But I'll feel like I want to buy something, and like I might enjoy doing that, and I'll, go out and buy something, usually something minor.
Right.
But anyway, so it was those moments where I had to note I was having that urge, and I just set it aside and carry on.
Yeah. Can you tease that out a little bit for us? I mean, because you're obviously, you know yourself well. Do you know where that comes from? Do you have a sense of what's driving that sense of, is that your hunter-gatherer? What is that that's thinking like, I need something and I should go get it?
Well, some people really enjoy shopping. I'm not one of those people. My husband is actually the stay-at-home dad, and he does most of the shopping. If anything, I've suggested we go on a new no new stuff escapade for the next year. So he said, wait till after my birthday on September 3rd, and we'll do it. So that's forthcoming. But I think what it is that I don't typically have any interest in shopping, but every once in a while I'll feel like I want to go to a store. Or, I might be in a situation where I have a little time to kill, and there's a nice little shop, and I'll enjoy ambling around in it. It's just a mood. It's a mood, but it's not. I don't feel like I'm filling a gap. Which I think some people do experience with consumption. I'm not feeling like there's a hole. It's just a particular kind of a mood.
Got it. Yeah. Well, and I would say that with some people, it is definitely an unconscious. There is a desire to fill something, and with stuff, and it's an easy fix available to folks in developed countries. You can easily walk out your door and find something to buy pretty quickly if what you want to do is that sort of transaction. And I wonder sometimes, is it about, even though it's a compromised or incomplete transactional experience, maybe it's about trying to be in touch with other people. It's a way of being out in the world and being among people, even again, if it is somehow perverted into this commercial experience as opposed to a unstructured, intimate moment of just sharing time and space with another person. So,
yeah, I mean, I think I can't say that every purchase I've ever made has been, a rewarding social experience, but there are definitely times, where you have a nice connection, or well, I appreciate buying local and supporting, local enterprises rather than big chains, or if they're chains that have, real sort of, they're values driven and really conscientious. So I feel good, whether it's, buying a tomato or, a battery from, the local shop or the pharmacy.
Excellent. So in your work and practice, how does organization and simplifying influence your choices as the executive director of a nonprofit? Talk to us about that. Where are you leveraging your 9.5 organizational skills inside the organization, and where do you find challenges managing teams and driving an organization and keeping a vision and focus?
Well, so on the upside, I've got my systems for managing a significant volume of email and a large range of things to do. And I'm able to sort of stay abreast not only of the things I need to keep track of, but the things that people I'm managing are working on. And, I'll tend to be, up to date and well prepared to really engage in meetings, and I can shift gears quickly and get back to where I was in terms of like my focus and my energy. I think the places where it presents, so on balance, it's a huge advantage. And another example is when I'm traveling. Other people functioning at my level, as an executive within a larger organization require a lot more travel support and assistance than I would in kind of managing my life as I move through the world. So that's all fantastic. The places where it becomes difficult are more, well, for one thing, I have a really strong inner administrative assistant. And so I am, while the best use of me is at a strategic level, at a more macroscopic level, really thinking through like the architecture of the organization and the relationships we need to move it forward, and a more externally facing role, I derive a lot of satisfaction from dealing with the kind of some of the operational or more administrative details, because it's so easy to accomplish something,
Right.
to file that, to file that away or to check that off the list. And I think, I allow myself some of that because, when you're trying to deal with big, really entrenched problems, you need to feel like you've achieved something in a given day. But I do have to restrain myself sometimes and say, like, that's not the best use of me. And I think the other thing is that, not everybody is naturally well organized. And so I have to, if I'm managing somebody who's really struggling with organizational skills, I have to, just figure out how to respond productively and support them to get better systems in place, and try to restrain like judgment or frustration.
Sure. That's excellent. And what I want to know, what I'm curious about now is if you'll share some of those systems. So, given that you must get a tremendous volume of email and how you're organizing your to-do list, what tools are you using, and how are you managing that flow of information and demands on your time? Be great to share that with us.
Yeah, so it's interesting. My systems evolve over time, and depending on my context, they're variable. So one of my primary infrastructures for monitoring my obligations is actually my inbox itself and flags in my inbox, my email inbox. I'm not a zero inbox person. I never have. In fact, my inbox is huge. But I regularly refer back to flagged emails, of which there may be several hundred in my inbox at any given point in time, to see not just what that's prompting or reminding me to do, but also what someone else I may be waiting someone else to do. Like I will BCC myself on certain communications with people internally or externally because I want to make sure to follow up and see that gets done. So that's one system, but it's a danger to be, and in fact, that system covers a lot of the day-to-day, the significant day-to-day work of my life. Interestingly enough, email could be, and I think for some people is a huge time suck because
Yes.
it's a distraction from what you actually need to be doing. And I think we all need to be careful about that. But in my world and in my work, email becomes a very central vehicle for substantive communication and engagement. So it's a good proxy for priorities. That being said, I also have just a blank sheet of paper that I'll usually start my week with, and I'll handwrite the various categories. Sometimes I'll start with a week, other times a day. If I'm really feeling overextended and I'm very compressed and I'm in and out of meetings all day, I'll say to myself, given the time I have available outside of meetings, what do I really want to achieve today? And I'll make a note of those things. So I'm always keeping something handwritten that's at a more kind of substantive macroscopic level, and it's helping me organize and understand how the work connects. And keep my eye on the ball.
Excellent. That's great. So really, it's pretty low tech in some ways. It's your inbox and flags, and it's a handwritten note that allows you to prioritize and keep appointments with yourself beyond the appointments that other people are setting up for you or other places where you have to be.
Yeah, at times I have had an Excel spreadsheet that, has my tasks and my due dates and my notes on progress. I'm not finding that necessary or useful to me right now, in part because I like to have that piece of paper with me in case something, prompts a thought on the tube on the way to work. I've looked at Trello and Evernote and, electronic functions, but I don't know. I feel like it's nice to connect with something physical in my world, which is so largely in the ether.
Yeah, I would agree. I tend to write notes to myself, and then I will translate them off into a digital medium so that I can share them with the team. But I start by handwriting, and there is brain science that says that the act of pen to paper, physically writing something, actually unlocks something for us and provides a neural pathway for greater retention. So whether that actually, everything becomes refuted at some point, but whether that's true or not, it seems to be true for me that it grounds me in the task. And in the same way that being in the shower is one of my most productive places where I can really think unfettered because I'm not distracted by anything. I'm just in the water. It allows me to really focus, and I find that handwriting does the same thing for me. There's really nothing else can intrude in those moments when I've got pen to paper. So
the other thing I should say, because this is an important complement to those other two, is that I have a small book. So that I have a small book that I carry with me
like a notebook
to all of my meetings. It's a small notebook, yeah. And so I will, in some meetings where appropriate, I'll actually take notes on a computer and clarify the next steps, which would, then be translated into a document that, like, for example, all of my travel all of my trips, I produce a trip memo, and it might be 10 to 20 pages long, with detailed notes of all my meetings and next steps, and sort of assigning work to me or other people across the team in terms of follow-up. And then that gets transitioned by my assistant into an action points document that's entirely separate from what else I'm doing. And in this book, which I use in cases where it's not appropriate to pull out a computer, like let's say I'm early in the stage of developing a relationship with a new donor, I'm not going to whip out a computer and track all those notes, but I might make a few notes to myself either during the meeting or thereafter, and I'll just use a little circle to indicate anything I want to follow up on in a meeting, or that or I want to remind myself to talk to someone else about, and then I'll scan back through that notebook on occasion, and I'll just cross the things off that I've taken care of.
Excellent.
So there are a few different places where my information resides, but each place serves a slightly different function, and for some reason I don't need it all in one place, because they're all different categories of work and thinking.
Got it. So I think that that's also an essential takeaway, is to really to recognize that categorization, being able to, going back to the organizational triangle, like with like, one home for everything, and really thinking about bucketizing or putting like items with like items, so that when I'm talking to folks about time management and organization, I think it's essential that they not pit possibly domestic things against work things, so that you can't prioritize picking up the dry cleaning against writing the third quarter report. They don't belong in the same sphere. I mean, they're all dealing with the same 24-hour pot of time that we have, but it's going to create some sort of dissonance or disconnect, I think, for folks when you're trying to figure out, well, what should I do? Dry cleaning might be a 1 in your personal life, but the third quarter report is a 1 in your professional life, and they should be in different categories when you're trying to prioritize them. I find that works really well on for me in my practice, and also in the work that I'm doing with other folks. So
yeah, that's interesting. I actually, on my one sheet, I will sometimes have a personal list, but I don't tend to. That's only if something's really on my mind that I don't want to forget. More typically, any list I would make at a personal level would be in the morning. And I'm a bizarre person who really just thrives on productivity. There's nothing that makes me happier than like accomplishing things. So I will wake up on a Saturday and make a list of the things I'm excited to do. And sometimes, to my husband's chagrin, I might even make a list for the things he needs to do. He really loves that.
Yeah, I'll bet. Well, it's good that it's good that you know each other. So I think that's a key to a successful relationship is understanding who you're with. Because I know also in stuff discordant relationships, I hear from folks on either side of the spectrum who seem surprised sometimes after 20 years of marriage or being with somebody that, this is who the person is. And I think the first thing I say to them is, you've been with them for 20 years. This can't be a surprise. So why is it that you keep expecting them to respond differently to either your requests or your demands? And why is it that you have an expectation for how things are going to flow when you have empirical evidence over many, many decades that indicate that this has never become manifest? So why are you still holding out this false promise or expectation that today is going to be the day that they're actually going to, put the cap on the toothpaste, or they're going to, remember to hang the dish towel back up on the doorknob in the kitchen, on the kitchen cabinet? This is not who they are. So the sooner you accept it, and I don't mean you specifically, but I mean the sooner one accepts that the limitations of who the person is, the easier it's going to be to share space with them, right?
Yeah, although I think the trap we all fall into in that context is we might not believe that people can or will change, at a big and deep level, that we are kind of essentially who we are. But when it comes to the littler things, you find yourself thinking, if it really means this much to me, and I mean this much to you, can't you do that for me? I mean, that's kind of where that's the snare that you find yourself in.
Yeah. And in that way that we are all probably more self-interested than sometimes we are aware or let on. It's what is most personal is most universal. I think that people tend to be in that narrative of, yes, I mean, can't you tell how important this is to me? Why do you keep doing that? And they're not even paying attention. I mean, it's not even registering. Even, I mean, regardless of how many times we might attempt to communicate it with them in a, you know, from a shrill shriek to a calm and measured, hey, sweetie, just FYI, when you kind of, it's upsetting, could you maybe consider, I mean, no amount of manipulating the means of communication sometimes seems to affect change there. So I mean, which leads us to the macro, of course, when we think about unstuffing America, when we think about trying to affect change on a macro level, given that people are exactly who they are, how do we push forward, it's not even, I don't even like the term of an agenda, but a mindset shift among our neighbors, our communities, about right stewardship of resources, of simplifying your life to make it manageable, because it, again, it has impact on both the micro and the macro. If you're so busy trying to find your car keys or your mobile phone or your wallet that you're always 15 minutes late for anything that you're doing, how are you going to be effective out in the world if you're dragging that kind of, you know, psychic drama behind you, not to mention the physical clutter and disorganization? And it's not a rhetorical question, but it is one of those conundrums that I struggle with in trying to find the direct route through it, or the solution to engaging folks who are in that trap of too much to do, not enough time to do it all. So what do you think about all of that?
Well, I mean, to start where you did in terms of, you know, how we convince people to unstuff. Yeah, I mean, there are people with, like, you know, real psychological disorders, right? They're hoarders, you know, but let's set them aside and just deal with, like, your average everyday, like, stuff obsession that, you know, most people, say in a North American context, and increasingly globally, who, you know, who draw their cues from North American media have. I mean, one thing is, I don't think we spend enough talking about what makes people happy and satisfied and content in their lives. I mean, I was really interested in Bhutan's um, index, not for the gross domestic product, but I think it's a gross happiness index.
Yes.
And they actually analyze, you know, their country, and not on the basis of how much they produce or their economic productivity, but you know, the everyday experience of people. So I think we have to do more in the way that you are to help educate people to understand that, you know, stuff isn't the answer to, you know, to joy or fulfillment or happiness. And, you know, and I say that knowing that we're living in a very privileged position.
Sure.
And it sounds privileged to say that, but in fact, there are a lot of people with almost nothing who are a lot more fulfilled and content in their lives than, you know, some of the wealthiest people in the world, who are just filling that gap. So one part is kind of just building that consciousness and awareness and having people find other ways to experience joy and satisfaction. I think another part is just, at least for people who are kind of more progressively minded, introducing them to a culture that is, you know, so shockingly, I mean, I remember when the story of Stuff first came out, watching that and hearing about, the thing that most struck me about that very short piece, which explains, you know, the sort of the dangerous obsession we have with producing, consuming, disposing, and destroying stuff in this culture, is this notion of planned obsolescence, which is
Right.
that companies actually produce products which are designed to fail, or designed to be, you know, sort of socially irrelevant or unacceptable in a short period of time. So you will go back, you know, and buy the next version. You know, the iPhone's a perfect example. So, you know, I think that for people who are progressively oriented and worried about, you know, the environmental impacts, of, and the labor impacts of this kind of world, better educating them about the machinations of corporate culture that are driving, whether it's advertising, or creating, a false sense of need, that can be productive for those people as well. And I think, and then maybe also it's a question of giving people tools to make it easy. Like I also sometimes, in general, I try to have a stuff in, stuff out approach. So if I'm bringing something
Third leg
into
of the
my life, what
triangle.
am I? Yeah, what am I? Well, I'm bringing something in. What am I? What's heading out? And it's made easy by the fact that I'm constantly being delivered these little plastic bags here in my home in London, which all I have to do is put them out on my porch, full of clothing, which my kids are growing out of or otherwise, and that will make its way to a charity nearby. So there's certain, I don't know, I think it's a combination of factors, and I really think different things will resonate with different people. I don't think it's productive to be in a place of sort of pedagogy or critique. I think there needs to be some kind of something that's meaningful, that's a kind of a call to action or a call to change that someone can resonate with. And I think different people will connect with different components of the program.
Yeah, well, I would definitely agree with that. And I try to avoid pedagogy as a, I mean, there's some fundamental tools. I mean, even going back again to the organizational triangle, one home for everything, like something in, something out. After you get those three rules, there's really, getting organized is not rocket science. It's not quantum physics. It's really just about having a home for everything, making sure like objects are together. And when you achieve stuff equilibrium, when you have enough of everything, then letting everything that doesn't serve you go to a different home. And it's easy to sustain that, right? Something in, something out makes it really, really easy. The whole point of all of that is to get on the other side of it, right? That for me is where liberation happens, is that once your stuff is under control, once you have enough that is useful to you and is not distracting you, then what do you want to spend your time doing? Because that for me is the bigger picture. It's just stuff, right? How long do you really need to spend moving crap around your home or your office? At some point, what do you want to spend your time doing? And that for me, that disconnect is one of the things that drives me, is that I feel like so many people are waiting either for permission or clarity or both to be truly engaged in their lives, that they're in some way, not quite as science fiction as the Matrix, but folks are just asleep in this awake slumber as they move through time and space, as if something is going to interrupt them. And whether that's our work that's going to be the interrupter, or some other epiphany is going to occur to engage them. But trying to unlock that and find the different touch points where people can be engaged is one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about, because I feel so acutely that sense of beyond the lack of power and mobility in the world, and that sense of impotence and ability to affect change, is on the macro level, is also sometimes, I think, on the micro level, where I feel it as an empathetic person, is, oh God, it's so upsetting to see you so unhappy. What can we do to get you happier? What's sitting between you and happiness? How do we get that out of your way? Because it seems like there ought to be a direct path to happiness, which is, it doesn't seem like it should be that hard to find. And yet I find so many people are confused by that and disengaged from it. And again, it's not, as the Dalai Lama will say, or any other great teachers in the world, happiness is not necessarily something that you're going to do. It's something you're going to experience, and what's sitting between you and that experience. So,
Yeah.
Well,
no, I think it's a worthy focus for a life's work, because I think it's at the root of a lot of challenges we face at a personal and at an ecosystem level. And I don't think people are conscious enough about what it means to continue to opt into and contribute and sustain the new consumer culture. I mean, by which I mean very few people look to secondhand markets or flea shops or community share opportunities to get what they need, or borrowing. If you get on, the right range of listservs, you can have whatever you need. In fact, I mean, I remember once during my no new stuff year, my kids grew out of their snow parkas, and I didn't want to buy a new snow parka because I had made this commitment, but I wasn't going to let them go cold. So I put a note out. I said, we're in the market for some new parkas. Does anybody have anything they want to get rid of? And sure enough, I had like 4 parkas on my porch the next day. So, it's amazing what, and people enjoy giving
Of course.
things away and supporting you in that way. So,
yeah. Well, great. Is there anything, as we wrap up, are there any final thoughts, anything that you'd like to share with the listeners that we haven't covered, or anything that's floating around?
No, I don't think so. But I think, really, I guess what it comes down to is figuring out what really matters, to all of us, both in terms of how we spend our time and how we spend our money. And, in terms of money itself, I mean, I've been trying to teach my children there's really only 3 things you can do with your money. You can spend it, you can save it, or you can give it away. And I think you should do those things if you can afford to in roughly equal proportion. So, that's one set of choices, and the other is, what does your time mean to you, and how are you going to use it? And I think we tend to live in a scarcity mentality about time. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough resources, and if we can transition ourselves from a perspective of scarcity to a perspective of sufficiency at a minimum, or potentially even of abundance, the world is our oyster. And so that's what I try to do. I don't, like you say, there are contexts in which there isn't enough time, where you're really that overextended, children with special needs, parents with special needs, a demanding job, you barely have time to, go to the bathroom. I know that does happen. But for the vast majority of us, we are making unconscious choices all the time about, the time we spend on Facebook or watching the latest Game of Thrones series or whatever else it is. And those are choices, and it's fine for us to make them, but we should recognize that does mean there's other things we might enjoy doing that we're not doing.
Excellent. I think that is a great place for us to wrap up. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us. It's always great to talk to you and see you. And I think you've left us with some great tools and information. So thanks so much for being here. And everybody, thanks for joining us for another episode of Unstuff America.
Thanks for having me.
Sure.